White Sox fans, welcome to a late night Saturday edition or early morning Sunday edition of Believe in White Sox, depending upon when you are listening to us. I am Greg Mraz, your host, and look, I've had a very busy work schedule over the last couple of weeks. It is staying busy, and that's the reason why, after our John Schriffen interview, you haven't heard from us. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you'll see just an image, and that's just because I don't have time to realistically set up the entire video, record, and be able to edit two different versions of this show. Like, that's just kind of where we're at in life right now, and I hope that people will understand not having to see my ugly mug on camera. But the White Sox, I was going to address when we talked on Monday. The plan was going to be to talk on Monday. That starting pitching was the biggest need. That this team had to look themselves in the mirror and say, if we had to do one thing, what would it be? And that is get themselves a starting pitcher. And I know that Noah Schultz looked decent in the bulk relief role today down in Tampa, and maybe that's how he would have ended up being used the rest of the year had he ended up staying in the rotation. But the White Sox went out and made a move. Probably not the last. So, Luis Castillo, a three-time All-Star, who was a big part of the Mariners' run to the ALCS last year, is coming to the Chicago White Sox. Him and his $22.75 million average annual value salary. The White Sox will be sending back Seranthony Dominguez, Nolan Jones, and Boston Smith. So why I like this for the White Sox is simply this. You fill a need. Is he having a good year? The answer is no. This is by far, at age 33, the worst year of Luis Castillo's career. He has an ERA of 5.06 at this point, through 20 appearances, 17 starts. So he's actually come out of the bullpen a couple of games, being the bulk innings guy and also having worked as part of a tandem. His ERA is over 5 for the first time in his career, but I feel confident that with a fielder's independent pitching of 4.57, that a change of scenery is probably going to do him pretty good. Now, his strikeout to walk is not good. It's at 2.69. He's been over 3.5 pretty much each of the last 4 years, and his strikeouts per nine is down significantly. It's at 7.8. Just 3 years ago, his last All-Star appearance, it was at 10. He's still got a really good fastball, but his breaking stuff is just simply not as good as it used to be. But with that being said, Luis Castillo at this point is a lot better than whatever your options were going to be for a fourth or a fifth starter internally. Because I wouldn't trust Noah Schultz to be consistent. He's had times where he's been good, and then there are times where he blows up, like the Yankee outing on Monday night. He was good through the first 3 innings, and then he just completely blew up. Now, against the Rays, he was solid. He had one mistake, but the White Sox offense didn't do anything for him. And when you look at the financials on Castillo, the White Sox are going to pay all of his salary this year and all of his salary next year. Now, by trading away Seranthony Dominguez, you offset what Castillo's salary is versus what Dominguez's salary is. And essentially, the White Sox are getting Luis Castillo next year, assuming there is a next year, for around $12.5 to $13 million, which is pretty good for somebody of his resume. Giving up Seranthony Dominguez is not a bad move, because it's pretty clear that with Jordan Hicks in the spot that he is now, with him comfortably taking over one of those 6th, 7th, or high leverage late inning relief roles, that the White Sox were more comfortable going with Hicks than they were Dominguez. They had no comfort in using Dominguez in a high leverage role. And if they could get rid of his salary, which is only going to look worse next year, $10 million for a reliever that can't close or can't be a setup guy, then you do that. And the Mariners figured that they have so much starting pitching depth that if you're going to trade somebody away out of your rotation, trade the guy with the high salary. Now, if the White Sox had wanted, say, Emerson Hancock or George Kirby from the Mariners, they probably would have had to pay higher prospect cost. Somebody on Twitter pointed out to me that of the 3 guys that the White Sox sent to Seattle in this trade, none of them were in the organization last year because Boston Smith was part of another trade. He was part of the Curtis Mead trade that they got from the Washington Nationals. So, Boston Smith is somebody that I think the White Sox probably didn't want to part with, given the fact that throughout all levels of the minors this year, he's hitting .291 with an on-base of .448, an OPS of .1037, 22 homers and 58 RBI. But again, this is somebody that is a prospect. He is only in his second year of pro ball. He was a 6th rounder by the Nationals last year. But this is the guy that they got back in the Curtis Mead deal. And you were probably going to have to give up somebody of significance prospect-wise in order to give up Seranthony Dominguez. I think there's some horse trading that went along here that probably the White Sox felt that this was the right move in order to get rid of Seranthony Dominguez, but also be able to add a starting pitcher that has had postseason success. Luis Castillo was nails in the postseason for the Mariners last year. And if you think that this team is going to end up getting to the playoffs and feel confident that they are going to end up getting to the playoffs, and at this point, at 58 and 52, with a 3-game lead in the division, I feel good about where they're at going into the final 2 months of the season. I'll feel better when they pick up a catcher, and I'll feel better when they bolster their bullpen. I mean, the weakest link of the White Sox bullpen is gone. In fact, the White Sox have effectively gotten rid of their 2 weakest links in trades. Brandon Eisert in the deal that freed up the money to draft Landon Tomei, and Seranthony Dominguez. So now, the White Sox are going to have a decision to make. What are they going to do with Noah Schultz's rotation spot? Are they going to keep Schultz in the rotation and move Fedde to the bullpen? I would say after the way that Eric Fedde pitched on Friday night that Fedde has to stay in the rotation. So does Noah Schultz go down and you bring up a reliever? Does Noah Schultz just go to the bullpen? Do you trade for another reliever? I don't know what the situation is going to be, but right now you've got 4 guys out of the pen in Hicks, Hudson, Newcomb, and Taylor that you feel pretty confident about anytime they take the hill. And I'm feeling more and more confident about Trevor Richards whenever he takes the hill because of his ability to keep guys off balance and the fact that he's got one of the better changeups of any relief pitcher in the American League, despite the fact that he doesn't throw hard. So maybe the Sox end up getting another reliever. Maybe they kill 2 birds with 1 stone and they pick up a catcher and a relief pitcher. Maybe they end up picking up another starter. They move Fedde to the bullpen, and you end up sending Schultz down to the minors. I don't necessarily know what's going to end up happening with Noah Schultz. I will say that he's definitely somebody that could benefit from going down. I've been saying that for a while. I'm surprised the White Sox didn't bring up a David Sandlin to replace him, but now it feels like, at worst, your rotation in this order for the rest of the year is Burke, Martin, Castillo, Kay, and Fetty. And you know what? If Fetty's your fourth starter and not your fifth starter, or rather your fifth starter and not your fourth starter, then I think you feel pretty good about that. And the White Sox have such a low payroll anyway. And we don't know what's going to happen with the salaries for the 2027 season, assuming a 2027 season even happens. But I think it's a good move. I think you get a proven veteran starting pitcher that will get, probably around 10 starts after coming over to the White Sox, and will probably make an impact in a positive way. Now, Luis Castillo last pitched, if I look at the game logs here, he last pitched on Tuesday. So he could start probably, my guess is he probably starts the series opener in Boston on Tuesday. That would give the White Sox an extra day of rest for both Davis Martin and Sean Burke, who both of those guys, given how gritty their performances were against the Yankees in the home series, could definitely use them. So I think the off day on the trade deadline day, you probably set it up so that Castillo opens up that Tuesday night in Boston, and then you can either keep Burke on normal rest and have him go Wednesday and give Martin an extra day, or both guys get an extra day and Martin goes Wednesday and Burke goes Thursday. But this is just more of a discussion about how you fit Castillo into the rotation and where he slots in. I think he starts the Tuesday night game. And then your rotation goes Castillo, Martin, Burke, Fetty, and Kay. And then you figure out what to do with the final pitching spot. Whether that is trading for another starter and moving Fetty to the bullpen, whether it's just moving Schultz straight to the bullpen, whether it's the possibility of either Tanner McDougal or Hagen Smith coming up and being a part of the Sox bullpen for the last couple months of the year, because Hagen Smith and Tanner McDougal have been pitching out of the White Sox bullpen, or rather out of the Charlotte bullpen, I should say. And I figured we'd come on and we'd actually talk about like this being the biggest deal, but then, an hour later, Tarik Skubal gets sent to the Dodgers. All I can say is that the White Sox won't have to face him again until if they make the World Series, because the White Sox already played the Dodgers this year. So when the Tigers come back, you don't have to worry about Tarik Skubal. And when you go back to Detroit, you don't have to worry about Tarik Skubal. And I am totally good with that. There's a lot of people on Twitter that are not happy with this trade, meaning the White Sox trade for Castillo. But look, it's not like they were in a position where they could trade for somebody like a Tarik Skubal. They just can't. Nor would the White Sox be able to trade within the division at this point. Now, they might possibly be able to get a Seth Lugo or Michael Wacha from the Royals. That's an opponent you probably could trade with. I thought that they were going to get Robbie Ray from the Giants, but I think the Giants were asking for too much for a rental. Giants also are apparently not listening on Logan Webb, which I think is dumb, considering the fact that Webb is going to get you a lot back in return, and the White Sox probably didn't want to part with enough prospects to where Webb would even have been a possibility. But I would have rather had a half season of Robbie Ray than Luis Castillo, especially considering that Ray would have given you a second reliable left-handed starting pitcher. The one thing I will say is that Ray is a high walk guy, and the White Sox do have their walk issues. So rather having somebody like Castillo, whose walk rate is significantly lower, it's not as good as it's been in the past. 2.9 walks per 9 innings is a lot better than Robbie Ray's, which I imagine that Ray's is over 4. Yeah, Robbie Ray's walks per 9 is at 4.2, but Robbie Ray is having a much better year. In 22 starts, he's got a 3.08 ERA and 122 and 2/3 innings. So Robbie Ray is somebody that is going to end up getting probably a bigger return than the White Sox would be willing to pay. And again, you don't want to mortgage the future to go for it this year in a year where the American League is a complete crapshoot. I do think, though, that the White Sox need to make some sort of effort to get a catcher. And you look at the Athletics big board, their mock trade board, which they published a couple of days ago. And pulling this up here, I have it in my saved tweets. The catchers that are going to be out there will be Hunter Goodman, is their number 6th ranked overall trade prospect available, and I think that the Rockies are not going to part with him unless they get a boatload in return. Adley Rutschman is certainly available, given the fact that the Orioles seemingly want to move on from him and don't want to give him another contract. Liam Hicks from the Marlins is certainly a reasonable choice as well. He's number 20. So one of those 3 guys could potentially be really good. I think that if you're going to tell me that the Sox get a rental catcher to finish out this year and then hopefully reboot with Teal and Caro next year, I would be okay with that. I think we have to come to the reality that Edgar Caro might not end up being a starting catcher in this league. And the problem that we thought we were going to have about having 2 starting caliber catchers may end up working itself out. But again, him and Teal are both young. I worry about Teal injury-wise at this point, and the strikeout rate was really frustrating me. And I honestly think that even if he's healthy, if Kyle Teal doesn't come back this season, I'm okay with it. I'm all right with it. Now, Adley Rutschman's on the IL, and would you want to trade for a guy that is on the injured list? And I don't know if Adley Rutschman has ever lived up to the potential of his number 1 overall draft status. Or maybe teams are going to be willing, because it's hard to find great catching. Maybe there's a team out there that's going to be willing to actually say, we'll give you a little bit more for a catcher, just given the fact that the market is not going to be very good. There's going to be a lot of decisions to be made, and we're going to end up seeing a lot of moves go down in the next couple of days with teams that we may or may not think actually have a chance to win the American League this year. What are the Tampa Bay Rays going to end up doing? Because they're by far the best team in the American League right now. Everything put together, starting pitching, lineup, health, the Rays are the best team in the American League. The Yankees, by record, are the second best team. Their starting pitching is legit. Their bullpen is awesome. Their lineup outside of Ben Rice right now leaves something to be desired. And when they get healthy, they could easily be the favorite to win the American League and get to the World Series. But we don't know when Aaron Judge is coming back. We don't know if there's going to be any lingering effects from the Cody Bellinger injury, and we don't know about Giancarlo Stanton. So the White Sox could end up slotting in here and being the team that takes the mantle in the American League. If you wanted to ask me what's a team right now that I think could surprise people and win the American League, that if they made one or two trades that they could be the dark horse to win the AL, I think it's the Houston Astros. I think with the kind of season that Yordan Alvarez is having, that he could easily carry a team to a World Series, and that Astros lineup is still very, very good. Their pitching staff is good enough. And in that weak American League West, they could beat up on some teams and get some confidence, and, they certainly got a lot of guys that have postseason experience. So I worry about Houston. Houston's the team that in the American League right now would worry me. The Sox got to go down to Houston first week of September. But, the month of August for the White Sox is going to be critical. You finish up the series with the Rays, you go to the Red Sox, and then we talk about division. Guardians at home, Tigers on the road, Twins on the road. And you don't get the Twins at home again until first week of September, 4th, 5th, and 6th. I'm telling you guys, there's a lot that's going to happen. There is a lot that is going to happen in the next 2 months. Get excited. Hopefully Luis Castillo is worth his weight in gold and finds a way to eat some innings, solidify this rotation, and give this team the confidence that they need to where whoever goes out on the hill, you feel confident that the Sox have a chance to win that day. I just have not felt that with Noah Schultz, and even though Luis Castillo is not having his best year, I still feel like, given the track record, that Castillo will round back into form, and you will see some version of the guy that was the ace of the Mariners staff for 3 years. I really feel that way. I am confident that the White Sox are going to end up getting a version of Luis Castillo that will contribute, that will help. And even if he's a 3 or a 4 starter, you gave up Seranthony Dominguez his money, and it ends up being a little bit of a net overpay for you, but you get an experienced guy to be part of a very young rotation. And that, to me, having that veteran leadership in that rotation is going to help lift all boats. That's the rising tide that's going to lift these boats. That's going to give Sean Burke and Davis Martin and Anthony Kay the confidence that they need to be able to pitch in high-leverage games. These guys are pitching in games that matter. Games that could end up being the difference between whether or not they make the postseason. Having somebody that's been there and done that and been very good very recently on a team that should have made the World Series, I think it's a very good move, even if you did overpay. And if Luis Castillo comes back to form, then boy, the White Sox have ended up adding an absolute ace to their rotation. Every trade comes with a risk. That's what you have to understand. Every trade comes with a risk. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But you know what? As the old saying goes, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And in this situation, it is better to have tried and failed than to not try at all. All this shows to me is that the White Sox know they have a chance to do something special and are giving themselves a chance within reason to do that. Bottom line is this: the White Sox roster is better now than it was at the start of the day. That's the bottom line. And I will leave you with that here on Believe in White Sox.